Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tokyo Comic Attack. My name is Oscar, also known as Big Fat Dog Comics. With me today, as always, are Mulele,
Hello.
known as Mulele Rudux, and Chris.
Hi.
Chris, you with us, man?
Yeah.
There he
Did
is.
it not come
There
through?
he is. Chris, you can find us. I didn't hear you there. We can find us Sketchfro on all the places where you generally look for people who make comics. Today, I had the honor of trying to bring a comic to a topic to our little conversation circle. I wanted to talk about like how we make comics. I feel like it's interesting for people to get to know us a little better, and maybe they've seen some of our works. How do these things get made in the broadest sense possible? But personally, I feel it's kind of like from there is no concept of this comic to final pages, like printed book in hand. What's going on there, kind of thing. I don't know if any of you guys wants to kick it off or.
I'm very curious about your process, Oscar. I actually want you to start first.
Oh my!
I'm kind of curious.
So comics for me, I tend to think about. I like to have some kind of idea of a genre, or kind of like what kind of book am I aiming to make here. It's very worth stating that that's not always the book or the genre it ends up being, but I feel like starting to work on something, it's you start out with the good old intimidating blank page. So kind of process of elimination wise, I just go, okay, I'm not making this kind of story. I'm not making this kind of story. But personally, the way I work, it's very visual. I have ideas, but they constantly need to be on paper. So usually I would start with well, the easiest thing is like main characters or main setting or something, but I would maybe think of something I find interesting and then kind of translate that into a drawing or like sketches. And I was thinking the best way I can kind of describe my working process is kind of like a sort of self-pollination, because I'm constantly like idea drawing, and like the drawing makes me think of more ideas and then more drawings, and I'll end up with sketchbooks full of like cryptic scribblings, and something will emerge from that. From that, I will be like, these are the things that interest me the most. Like this character stands out to me. This is a cool thing that happens that I want to put in the story somewhere, and I'll have all these elements, and I'll kind of mix them up into something. And that's the point where I would say, okay, I kind of know what I want to do. Let's do layouts, and I kind of work, like, to be technical. I have this little sharp pencil, the ones made by the big company, the BIC guys. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but and I do most of my work in one of those, actually. It's my preferred tool. I feel like this is like a habit that's followed me since high school, because I was like always scribbling in class with, you know, the kind of pencil you would have in a school setting, and I just got so used to it that I'm still using it now for most of my work. So I'd be making sketches in little sketchbooks, usually A4 size, go to layouts. And lately what I find I've been doing is that I tend to redraw pages a couple of times. because my storyboards, because I've seen stuff that Japanese mangaka they call the nemu, which is the storyboard, I guess you would call it in English. And the nemu is like, it looks amazing for so many of these guys. Because first they call it, no wait, first you get a rough, you call a rafu or a rough, and then you polish it to a nemu, and then you will go to the shitagaki, or like the penciling, I guess you call it in English. I'm more familiar with the Japanese comic lingo than the American ones, I think. But
okay.
And then you would ink those. But my roughs are usually so rough that it's not readable to other people. So I'd kind of go from unreadable scribblings and kind of keep polishing it. And occasionally I'd go all the way to inkting. I used to ink with G-Pens and like the real, this is how you do manga, the Shonen Jump way, like what they tell you to buy in all those how to draw manga books kind of things. I never really put like the hour, because they always start out with, you're supposed to fill out 20 books just like muscle memory to get the feel of the pen. I want to go back to that, but I kind of always skipped over that step, so I don't really feel at ease using that. So I kind of switched to these little Copic markers, I guess they're called. These pigments, you know the ones I'm talking about, I hope. It's a podcast, so I hope I'm describing it right. I'm holding one right now, but that is of no good to anyone. I have a little set of like 0.5, 0.3. I have like 5 of those in a little box, and those are my good buddies. When it, like, most of my inkting these days, I do with those guys. So I kind of switch between this old little sharp pencil and those comic pens. But I have been really reappreciating the Lightbox. I grew. I might have mentioned I studied some animation back in the days, so I always liked the Lightbox, but using it for lately, I've been learning to use it, or learning to appreciate using it for comics. And sometimes I'd ink the page and I'd be like, I feel I could do better. And then, because the first time you draw it or you inked it, you kind of you get the idea, but like, it's not there yet when it comes to line quality or anything. Well, in my case anyway. So I'd be doing the page, and every time I do the page, I kind of figure out more about it. So I draw the page and I'm like, okay, this is the layout I want. This is kind of the way I want everything to look. Now let me do that again, and with proper lines this time, kind of. And
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So in this stage of it, you're just working in pencil. You're not working in ink yet. Or are you fully rendering your pages?
The line kind of blurs, because I would. I do pencils first, but I finish kind of roughly, I feel, compared to most people. And I would ink over that, and that's why what I'm saying is sometimes I'm not satisfied with the inking because the penciling was a little rough, and that's the point where I kind of Lightbox it, go back to pencils, and get like, because of the doing the inking once makes me have a clearer idea of what it was I wanted to start with, and knowing that, I kind of go back one step and then redo the inking. Like, go back a step, do it in pencil, do the inking again, and then like, yeah, that's more what I wanted it to be. But first time around, I don't always hit the mark or know what I want to do there. So I guess what I want to say is I don't work in these very clear defined steps. It's not like pencils are done, I'll never do pencils on this page again. it always goes like back and forth a little as I feel is needed. And this is all analog, by the way. I do. What numbers do I want to put on this? 80% of the work in analog, but I always finishing up everything up digitally. Big fan of Photoshop, but have recently, I guess for color stuff, Photoshop is still my go-to program, but for because I've been pitching some things to Japanese magazines which are all black and white, and if you want to pitch to a Japanese manga magazine, you gotta use toner and everything, not to stand out too much, or to kind of get you gotta keep the visual style of the magazine as a whole in the back of your mind a little bit. And so I've been using Clip Studio and really liking it, considering maybe if I get familiar enough with coloring there, because I think Chris has been coloring in Clip Studio. I'm sure we'll hear more about that later, but
maybe.
But that's usually where I that's kind of the idea what today's about, like comparing the way how we make these things. So yeah, I would finish up digitally. What do I mean with finishing up though? I used to do like line work editing and stuff as well, but that's a habit I've been trying to break because I feel I lose so much time going in there and messing with lines or trying to redraw things. I felt that through my experiences, it's generally faster to just redo the whole page or redo a panel maybe and scan it in. But just as a rule, not to touch on the groundwork too much and just fiddle with because Clip Studio, for example, is interesting there because when you work in Clip Studio, you can make like the panel borders and everything separately. So you could, for example, draw something a little bigger, and then have the panel border in. And if you go back on it and like, maybe I want this panel to be bigger. If you have a bigger drawing underneath, you can still give yourself some wiggle room there, which is very interesting.
Now, I have a quick question for you on that account, because again, we both are working with Clip Studio, but you're talking about like making panels in Clip Studio, which I think is not only like a good time saver, but is also very efficient for the person who is using it. But I'm just one of those, as you said before, an analog person. I like doing it by hand. Have you felt the difference between drawing a panel by hand or like just being like, hey, I'm going to draw these panels in Clip Studio and then add it to it? Is there a different feeling for you? Is it better feeling for you?
Now that you've mentioned it, you kind of got me there. I don't yet like doing panels in Clip Studio because just I guess it's a thing that takes. It's not like it's annoying or frustrating to use. It's just that it's such a weird way to work, and you kind of got to wire your brain differently. Because you're not when you think about drawing something, you have your layouts, you draw it, you scan it, and then you work with it. But if you start thinking of every panel being a drawing that's like held in a little panel box, but you can still change the shape of the box, that kind of changes the way you approach your entire page, to the point where sometimes I just want to go back and draw the panels on the physical page and not worry about them anymore. Because the problem I feel with digital, which you hear a lot of people say sometimes, is it gives you endless room to fiddle with everything. And the more stuff you divide into layers and the more liberty you get, the more you have to keep yourself from fiddling with everything. And it's like if I do the panels on the physical page, I can't go back on them. I might lose some options, but to me, it's still like sometimes it's a good thing because that helps me just move on.
Hmm.
Um, because having the freedom to do so, it's sometimes hard to say. Like, I guess what I want to say is I start messing with the panels because I can kind of.
Yeah,
It's
I
you know
get
they
that.
say yeah don't fix it if it's not broken kind of thing, but you kind of have to figure out when it's broken and when it isn't, and so you're kind of like a car mechanic going in and just rattling with stuff and seeing if it's okay or not, and that's not a good way to work. But I can
And it goes
definitely
back
see
to
that.
I think one of those things I hear where it's like the more limited you are, the more creativity I guess sometimes is you have, or like the more the ability that you have. And I feel the same way with that as well. There's lots of digital artists, even before I can remember doing a lot of digital art, when I looked on, like, for example, DeviantArt, and one artist that definitely pops up into my head is a guy named Endling. Endling did a ton of what you called endless comics. I think it was. It was the long, like, scroll panel
Oh,
comics.
the endless scroll ones, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And wherein there's a beauty to that, I think there's also a horror to that, because I would do contests on DeviantArt where it would be in that format, and it's like, okay, panel one, scrolling down the page, and it's endless, and there is no kind of set frame of record, or there's no like boundary to it, and I've always found myself being like, I want to go to paper and then put it into this scroll, and it felt more comfortable to me. I don't know. I feel that sometimes when it comes to digital work, some people excel at that with making those kind of panels and those pages, and other people like me, I lose my mind.
Yeah, I think I've myself come to a point where, of course, it's a constant push and pull, but especially the moment where I'm at now is I feel working physically and working analog is sometimes more liberating to me than working digitally. Um,
Hmm.
because you work digitally, it's like, oh, I have all these software, I have these millions of brushes, and I can download all these things, and you know, you can spend hours without drawing a single line because you're just messing with stuff. While at my desk, uh, I'm actually looking at my desk here. I have a little tomato sauce can with a bunch of brushes in here, and that's it. I just pick whichever one of these brushes I feel is gonna work the best, and if I want to use a new brush, I'm not gonna run out in the middle of a painting and buy a new brush specifically because I feel that one would be better. Which is something you can do with digital. You can just be, oh, let me just open a new tab, get some brushes or whatever. It's such a different way of working. But when it comes to color, I've definitely been, especially the last few days. I'm not sure how long if this is a permanent shift in the way I approach color in comics, but I've been dabbling in coloring some stuff. Yeah, it's interesting because I saw a guy on Instagram uh, whose work I like, and he posted a picture of like here's a drawing in color I did, and he had like a few tubes of paint with it next to it, and I was like, hey, I have the exact same ones. Didn't know you were supposed to use them like that, and that kind of made me yeah, because I have a lot of art supplies that through the years I've done a lot of uh, art schools, and they always make you buy like this giant list of supplies, and then you kind of stuff them in a box in your room somewhere, and you're never experimenting with every single one of them. But I saw those tubes and I was like, I know those tubes, I have those, and that made me take those out and experiment with them. And it's a lot of fun, and I feel that pen on paper is just more fun. I feel. I don't think I'll ever be a full digital artist. Um, computers, like digital stuff, and me, we agree when it comes to gaming, and I feel like whenever I try to do anything else that's not playing video games, uh, the computer outsmarts me in some way or something. And I don't like the idea of spending. I think one of my friends in animation once said that he wanted to be a 2D animator or something, because if he was going to be a computer animator, because you go into animation to be an artist or whatever, not some guy sitting in a cubicle staring at a screen. And he's like, well, if I go down the path of computer animation, I'll be a guy in a cubicle staring at a screen.
I mean, you've seen the offices of Walt Disney, right?
which is kind of what he became, actually. It's kind of sad, but I feel like, yeah, I'm always on guard of keeping part of my process. I want to say analog, but I guess I want to keep it fun. And while stuff like Photoshop is an incredibly powerful tool, I've never been I've never had the same excitement of opening a Photoshop file as the old, physical blank paper on desk. So I think that would always be a very large part of my process. But at a certain point, it kind of comes down to speed as well, because you want to get your comics done at a pace that, because you have all your ideas, and you want to tell the world your ideas, so you got to keep making stuff as you keep coming up with stuff.
I struggled with that for a while when I started. When I got back into doing comics, and I started with Relic Hunter Riven, the newer stories. The first 4 chapters I did in Copic markers, because I was like, I don't know if I want to go back into digital. I don't know if I want to go back. I want it to be like completely traditional. And then one day I sat down at the computer, scanned the files, and it clicked, and it was like, this looks good, this works, let me try a different style. Okay, maybe digital is okay. And then I went back into digital for the comics again. It's all about what works for you. You're completely right about that case.
I do feel that I'm still figuring things out, but sometimes I go back to an old comic because I know I want to reprint it or have another look at it, and I pull up the digital files, and the layers will be messy, or like I lost a file, and then I find like a map in my room with all these old pages, and there will be a sense of security there that I can just scan these and use these again. That's probably that my digital management isn't on point as it should be, but anyway, the kind of roundup, I feel like that's so. My comic book, they start on paper and they end on the computer is kind of what I want to say, but for some projects there have been. I think the reason I'm trying to keep like a clear, less digital than physical rule for myself, because in most times it's not that. The physical part will be to me the most gratifying and the most fun, and then digital will be where I kind of slog down and then try to get it right. And sometimes, admittingly, that's where I'm kind of fighting the mistakes I made working physically and having more fun than being practical. And then digital is where I force myself to be practical and to it has to be a certain format, it has to be the technical details have to be right. So I am thinking if I can't save myself a little misery and see if I can reach more of a harmony between the two processes. But yeah, I think I can definitely say I will never be a full digital artist, nor do I think that I will be a physical only kind of guy. But it's interesting figuring those two out.
I think it'll be a nice melding one day when you're feeling like super comfortable with both mediums, and you can just kind of matrix between them.
Oh yeah, I guess maybe one other point before I leave the stage, because I feel like I've been blaring on a little long here, but I usually make my comics in Japanese. Like most of my old stuff is like that, and these days it still is like that, I suppose. But that means that to me, lettering and everything is way easier if I do it digitally. I never really hand lettered, or just did a little bit of it, but in my process, since I'm almost sure that most of my stuff I'm gonna want to make an English and a Japanese version eventually, that's always in the back of my head, and that's why I kind of like Clip Studio as well, because it gives you a lot of options for speech bubbles. And I was translating these old comics I made in Japanese first to English the other day, and it was one of my first projects that I made directly in Clip Studio. And you're translating one of the bubbles, and I was like, all right, this is gonna need resizing. And because it had this handy little Clip Studio bubble, I just had to click the bubble, resize it, and it looked good. There was no like weird free transform or anything. Like Clip Studio was there immediately. We're like, yeah, okay, you want to change the size of this bubble? Of course. Bam, here we go. And I think that's a very big plus for Clip Studio, especially if you're working with a project that's going to be in several languages or anything. It just saves so much hassle to be able to. Because the way I used to work many years ago would be I would only know Photoshop, so I'd have this finished version, and I would go into Photoshop and kind of like Photoshop out the English text or the Japanese text and kind of like make the English fit in there, and it would look horrible. But it was either make the English text way too small, or spend hours trying to blow up the text bubble without ruining the image. And my God, definitely big points for Clip Studio for making that way easier. Yeah, but I think that's me. Chris, you want to follow up, because you've just offered up a few sneak peeks of your process. You want to maybe jump in there and let us know how you start making your comics, and how did it go from there?
I press a button, and then it auto generates color, right? And then boom, you're done. And that's it. It's all it is. Auto generate. It's a beautiful button. No. It's funny that you say that you worked off like a more Japanese style and methodology, because that's how I used to be. I used to be full on, I am a mangaka, I'm a manga artist, I'm going to do things in the manga style. As you guys know, because I've told you, and many others probably don't, I had my decline, my fall of comics and everything, 2015, around that time. And I started rethinking my processes and things like this, and this is the reason why I'm doing a colored comic right now, is because I'm trying to see if this is something viable for me, if this is something that works for me. Putting that aside, my process is eclectic, but I love it. Much like Oscar, I start with something simple, a character or a design or a drawing or a sketch that blows up. I'm a big follower in the idea of, if I'm doing an illustration or if I'm doing a drawing, it should tell a story. So a lot of times I try to tell some kind of story with my characters or with like my drawings or my illustrations in general. If something works with a certain character, I'll do another drawing of them and another drawing and another drawing. And I'll keep doing drawings, building these kind of situations, snapshots, until it feels right. When it finally feels right, then I will develop a story for that character or those situations. And by that time, I've had them interacting with other characters, other situations, monsters, or worlds, ships, all these kind of things. Then the story, as I've already mentioned, I think before with the Mulele, I'm sorry, I don't write a script. I don't sit down in Microsoft Word and I don't sit there typing out things anymore. I used to do that because I thought it was the way that I had to do it. And I hated doing that. It didn't feel natural. It didn't feel right to me. What I do in actuality is I take my giant sketchboard paper and I do thumbnails and storyboards. And I storyboard out my ideas as they come to me. But at the same time, I have a sketchbook to do what's called keys. And I'll make shots or different sorts of situations, character, emotions, things like this. Those will be drawn in sketchbooks so that if I really want something emphasized, I can go to the sketchbook. That's the scene. That's how I want the character to look. That's how I want their face to look. And I can go into more detail there. When that's finished, the storyboards will go into rough pencils. Rough pencils will then go into inks. Inks will be scanned, and then I'll do either black and white monochrome or color like I'm doing now. But throughout this entire time, I should know my characters. And so I'm always thinking about what are they saying? What's happening? Does this feel natural? Does this feel right? Because once I'm finally getting to lettering and putting in the speech bubbles and putting in like the conversations, I will re-edit that many times, because if it doesn't feel like the character would actually say that, it's gone. And I'll redo it and I'll change it up.
Something I kind of want to ask here that I forgot to, I neglected to mention myself. Yeah, I don't work with a script either, but I kind of do it because I tried working. I want to try working with a script maybe again sometimes, but I feel like stuff keeps changing as I work on it so much that a script wouldn't have any meaning. Would you say that working, well, you have these ideas and these characters, at what point does the story stop changing, and can you just say, okay, now I just gotta, finish the drawings and finish the, or up until the last minute, are you still messing with panels or story beats or
up until the last minute? Even with this one, the pacing was a little off, so I had to like add panels into it to make it run smoother, or like I didn't like how something looked, so I had to change up something. Many times my panels in actuality, when you look at them compared to the storyboards, will not match. And that's because when I'm drawing it, I do the 3D box in my head, and this is going to sound crazy to anybody who's not an artist, so I'm sorry if there are non-artists listening to this and you're like, this guy is crazy, this guy is certifiable, but it makes sense. I imagine the scene and the situation in like a 3D world, so I'm actually imagining the entire situation in front of me or in my head, and then it's like moving the camera around to make the scene look right. Of course, following the rules of like cinematography, whereas like, of course, don't go over the imaginary line, making sure the shots line up right, making sure it's dramatic or it looks right, or it's a good angle, bird's eye, worm's eye, these kind of things. If I'm imagining the scene and the thumbnails, the storyboards are just aids to help me put it down on the paper the way that it should be told best. So I look at the sketch, that's how I should draw it. No, that's the idea to help me put it down on the paper the right way. And even when it's down on paper, it might not be right, and I'll change it like once the page is fully colored and I realize that something is wrong and I had to redraw a panel again. So no, it's not always like once it's done, it's done. It's more of like there's a frame of reference and there's a guide, and maybe something will have to change. So it's always that little saying in the back of my head, don't fall in love with what you draw or what you make. Be a fan of it, but don't fall in love with it, because if you fall in love with it, then you're completely against redoing it or remaking it or changing it.
Be prepared to kill your darlings, right?
Yeah, Death of Arthur.
So let me ask real quick.
Yep.
So you don't just like storyboard one page, draw one page, color one page, and then go to the next page, right? You're doing you're drawing as a batch, right?
Oh God, I can't do that. There's something about that I just can't do. I have to do the entire thing, storyboards, all, right. For example, 21 pages. They're storyboarded. Great. Then I go and I do all 21 pencils. Done. Okay. Go back, do all 21 inks. Okay. And then color process. I have to do it like in a batch. It doesn't feel right. It feels unfinished. If it's like I have one finished colored page, I have 21 more to go. I can't do this. But that's just me. I know there are other people who can do that. I have to do it like building a layer cake. I have to have the base completely finished and then put the next layer on top, and build and work up.
Also for you, Oscar, do you work as Chris does, or do you have a different style?
I think my stuff mostly lines up with how Chris works, though I'm thinking here, to me it's easier because my stuff tends to be not that high on page count, so it's easy for me to work through all of it mostly, though occasionally, like I mentioned with Kai, occasionally I do, I guess, kind of work from. I guess the most interesting thing maybe to describe is my latest one, the little Yonkomas with the big fat dog, for example. I do those page per page, generally like gag per gag, but once I'm coming up with jokes, sometimes like one joke will lead me into the next one. It's kind of like a follow-up, and I will do those kind of like I will storyboard those out together. So if it's like one gag, I usually have 2 gags per page. So I'll do one page, the other page, and I can just finish one page and move on to the next one, depending how many jokes I can think of in one sitting, kind of. But if it's maybe I come up with 2 good jokes and it's all right, let me finish these first. But if it's like a chain that forms like a small story, then I'd kind of storyboard all of those first, and then work them out one by one. But I think I'm mostly in line with what Chris does. But what I want to know is, because Chris, your stuff, the things I've seen, there can be a lot of pages in these though. So I'm thinking if you have one of your books that's that many pages, because you mentioned working in batches. How big are those batches, or what's the biggest book you have? You have a 100-pager somewhere? Or?
Are we talking like chapters, or are we talking about the books in total? Because
I guess just like the size of the batch you work in, like how many pages do you still have control over, I suppose?
Yeah, I work in a controlled batch. For most of my comics, I will keep it between. For most of my comics, I'll keep it between 21 to 28 pages a chapter. I'll try to.
The manga format.
I guess. I mean, even for like some of the leaflet comics I used to read back in the day, I would count them and be like, okay, this leaflet has 20 something pages in it. That's how many pages I have to make. And so I've always kind of felt comfortable with that. Someone told me I had to make 48 pages for a chapter if I was going to do manga. And that was overwhelming. I think Neoarc, my old comic, got to those big amounts of pages, but there's just so much packed into it that I would lose touch with the story a little bit. I don't know, like
yeah, I guess part of it's staying in a rhythm, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, but for Chris, if
Yes.
you're writing it 21 to 28 page chapters, how many chapters generally do you have in a book?
That depends on what story I'm trying to tell. For example, The Tale of Duke and Tamara is only 4 chapters in every book.
Okay.
Relic Hunter Riven is what? Yeah, it's a continuing like story, but yeah, there's only 4 chapters in every book.
Okay, but I mean, are you in your storyboarding or writing process? Are you aware of all parts of the story or already, or are you building on what you've previously made and only thinking about it after you've made the previous?
No. It's all encompassing, I guess you would say. Like for story, there is the timeline, whereas like A, B, C, D, E, and then the end, right?
Yeah.
But then how do I get to A? How do I get to B? How do I get to C? I do all of that planning before I jump into the storyboard. And that's what I'm thinking of when I'm doing the keys, like the little illustrations.
Right.
Those are set already, though. You already have an idea of your ending, and
yes, I know where I want to be, and I know where I want to start. And the middle, I will argue with myself, depending on what would work or what won't work. So as I'm doing storyboards, if something doesn't work, then I get rid of it, or I change it. I make a different path. Or if there's something else that I think is more interesting, then I will experiment with that storyboard and see if it's like a viable story, see if it works.
Okay, but I mean, as far as structure and writing your book go, or a series of books, as the case may be, would you feel sometimes that you should have added something to an earlier chapter that you have already completed and printed, or do you work that stuff out in advance completely?
Ooh, that is an interesting thing. I guess I do and have had that kind of is that hindsight? Is that regret? I don't know what you would call that.
Well, hindsight is fair. Regret is kind of hard.
It's a bit loaded, I suppose.
Yeah.
I have looked back at some things and thought, oh, if I had done this, maybe it would make more sense, or maybe it would write out more. But with that, it's more of older work that I've done. Mm-hmm. Most of my newer stuff, when it comes to the short stories of Relic Hunter Riven, or with this, I'd have to say no. But mind you, I am thinking about redoing Duke and Tamara because I want it to be in this newer style if it works out. So I am thinking about going back and retelling the story again differently. Mm-hmm. And then I will be in that hindsight mode, like what would make this better? What would make this look right now? Mm. But one of my old teachers told me that the more I look back, the more I'm not moving forward, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And
I was just gonna say something to that effect because I feel that backpedaling is very dangerous.
oh man,
Personally,
I
I
did
would
it all the
advise you to.
time.
Yeah, but look at your mistakes and don't make them again in the future, rather than go back and try to unmake them. I feel is a more productive way to. Because I feel like oftentimes it would be Malele, I think you who argues that uh, mistakes can often be very beautiful, and
Mhm.
you don't always get to decide that yourself in your own work. Um, Something that you would, in hindsight, find like annoying or wrong could be the very thing that connects the people, or maybe it's as a mistake itself is just so endearing. And again, going back to something Lily said on the last episode as well, it's the story of you as an artist is also part of it. So going back and trying to erase your mistakes is kind of going back and trying to clean up your own story, while the only thing that would do is make it less authentic, I suppose. Because those old crappy comics, in my personal case, I suppose, those old crappy comics are part of the road you walked, you know. And I want to rewrite everything I made until this point? Sure, but that would be a betrayal of the stuff I made, because that was made in a certain headspace and at a certain point in my life. And even if my newer stuff moves away from that just reevaluates it, I suppose.
Yeah,
Well,
I
that's my take on
do.
that anyway. But
I do think in that matter, like you have two schools, and I don't want to take up too much time. I'm sorry,
oh,
but you have two schools of this, and I'll take two really good examples. All right, let's look at Spider-Man, and then most of us know what One Piece is, right? Okay, so with Spider-Man, how many times have they restarted or rebooted the Peter Parker story?
I don't really read Spider-Man, and I can think of at least 3 or 4 times, I think.
All right. Mulele, would you say you're pretty much on the same page? Like, there's a couple of different like restarts of Spider-Man that you've seen before or read before.
I'm not familiar with Spider-Man enough to even know that there's a reboot. I'm more of the this story's too long. Kind of mine.
I mean, I'm counting the movies and everything, you know, because it's a.
Oh, if we're talking about movies, then yeah, sure, they've restarted like 3 or 4 times. But for the comic itself, I know they've rebooted it a couple of times, but I have no idea exactly what they did.
Okay, fair enough. Even going off with the movies as well, there have been significant like restarts with the Spider-Man series. So let's jump over to One Piece. Have they ever restarted that story?
I have never read One Piece. I'm sorry.
Nope. They I think the only versions of One Piece is one is like a short proof of concept kind of story called Romance Dawn, which pretty much became one of the first chapters of One Piece, and the rest is just one big adventure that's uninterrupted. I think.
But as far as I know as well, I've never seen a book come out that's like One Piece, episode 1, and it's redone completely in like the more up-to-date style that was drawn. I've never seen that. Not with any manga, mind you. I don't even think Dragon Ball has one where they redid the original series or they redid the start of Dragon Ball Z or something like this. I've never seen it.
Okay.
So I think it is a little bit of a cultural thing where in Western culture, you will have these kind of look back. What can you do better? Draw it again, make it better. But then in Eastern cultures, they kind of like, well, that's done. Now make the next thing better and keep making it better and better and better. So it's two different schools, I think.
I think that this philosophy actually lends itself to shorter works than to longer series. Because if we were telling this story of Spider-Man, and it has now gone on for how many years? 60 years?
The story of Spider-Man itself, or like the saga that is.
Well, the comic run from its first issue. What was it? Amazing Spider-Man until now, including all the reboots and branches off into other comics. So that 60-year run, if it were done by one artist, one writer, who I believe both died in the same year, basically, oh shit, I forgot my point. Never mind. Yeah.
It's getting late. I'm sorry.
I must be getting tired. But anyway, no, I think that the a shorter work can adhere to that much more easily than a longer work. And if you're doing a longer work, you do have to constantly have an eye on the past in order to not repeat yourself or contradict yourself. But with a short work, you can do it. It's of the moment. It's of that time. The essence is right there, and you move on. Otherwise, you're kind of dealing with an outdated concept or an outdated ism, and the artist that doesn't grow is stunted, and the work would begin to stagnate if it didn't start out that way. I have no idea about One Piece, and have never read it, and maybe someday. But sorry, did you say One Piece or Naruto?
No, I mean on both well, no, I can't say that because Naruto, they just did the time travel. They just did the time travel saga with Boruto, so I can't say that about Naruto.
Okay.
Sorry.
But Naruto is an interesting example, I think, because when we're talking about the reboot, I'm not sure what the two schools you were bringing up there is, but I do think it's interesting that you have the idea of rebooting the universe, aka if I have to watch Batman's parents die one more time, I'm gonna lose it.
See, this is why I said Spider-Man and not Batman, because I didn't want to make you upset for the night. I'm sorry.
I've seen it in musical, I've seen it in movies, I've seen it in video games. Musical is pretty cool. But like, I was thinking of Naruto the whole time because Naruto had the story that ended and he has a son and they basically continue with his son, which is kind of the same thing they did in Dragon Ball, these long series where the point comes where it's like time to retire the protagonist and they just make babies, make male offspring, so to say, and the story continues with them. Which I find interesting because it's something they do both in Western works and in Eastern or in Japanese manga, but it doesn't seem to be a thing that I'm not too familiar with comics, but I know that, for example, because you mentioned Spider-Man. Spider-Man has Miles Morales taking up.
Oh God, yeah.
He takes the identity of Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
And I think Batman does that, like his son does that in some timelines or whatever. But just the idea of, instead of resetting the superhero, pass on the costume kind of thing.
Well, with Batman, I have to say, like not passing it on to his son. Like, no, I don't like that concept. But if anyone ever remembers Batman Beyond, where this street rat freaking comes into like knowing the world of Batman is being taught by the old Bruce Wayne, and he has this new like technology mixed with the old ways, that was an amazing way to kind of reintroduce Batman for a modern world. Batman Beyond was a really, really good story for Batman. And that's one where I'll say, if they did something like that with these series, I'm fine. But I'm tired of having like, oh, let's have a carbon copy of the person who was successful. Now take on the story and let's do something new with it. Because in my opinion, it doesn't work. I didn't like Gohan taking over with Dragon Ball. I didn't like Boruto having a son in Naruto. And to me, it doesn't work.
Sorry, did Boruto have a son, or you mean Naruto has it?
Naruto has a son called Boruto, and then that's his carbon copy. I don't like it.
Oh no, I thought you said Boruto had a son, so I was like, whoa, I'm missing out.
No.
No, I do think that part of it is like, I've heard a theory that when you know these Hollywood trailers where they spoil everything. I believe Milena, what was what you recommended watching Get Out? Which is a movie that I really want to see, but at the same time I saw like a long ass trailer and all the twists and turns. I know them already, so I'm less motivated to see it. But I've heard a theory that they do that on purpose because people don't like new things, and if the trailer basically lays out the movie for you, you can have like a safer movie-going experience, because you already know what's coming, and that's kind of what people want. They don't want their boat rocked. They want to get what they already know and have like the safety in that. And I feel like the idea of just redoing Batman or redoing Spider-Man, and to a certain point having them have a son, and it can be debated where that's innovation or not, but just the idea of here's the safety of watching Batman's parents getting killed for the millionth time, because you know that, and it's safe, and it's not, introducing any new and dangerous concepts to you. It's just like the safe blanket of dead superhero parents is spread out over and over again. But sorry, I feel like we're straying from what we're trying to say. What was the two schools you were mentioning, or
me? Oh,
yeah.
I just believe that I personally believe that there's an Eastern and Western, quote unquote, school of belief when it comes to storytelling, where one is that you push on and continue making it better as your series or your story grows. And the other one is where you look back, and if you can do it better, you go back and you make it better. And so you go back and you redo it and you make it better.
So what I want to ask there is, so if you take, for example, Naruto has a son, and it's now Naruto with a new name, opposed to a superhero passing on the costume, do you feel those two are different, or?
I'm
not sure I follow you there, is the reason I'm asking, I guess. Because I feel like I've seen both things done, both in like manga and in comics, as far as I know. I've seen both things done to varying degrees of success, but I haven't personally seen a real pattern in this is how American comic books always do it, and this is how manga usually does it.
Well, that's right. Let's take a shorter series. We've all read Akira, so we're all kind of fresh up onto this one, right?
Yes. Shorter series.
6 books. Don't worry about
it. A light read, yeah.
But you do not see anyone going back and saying, okay, besides coloring Akira, right? Making colorized versions of it. There's that. But that's not what I'm talking about. There's not a brand new Akira out that's redoing the old series is there.
Except for the one Hollywood is trying to make. Point taken, damn it.
It got canceled.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have gone to see it, but just the idea of it existing.
We drag you to see it.
Probably. Damn it.
Yeah.
Damn it.
I want to hear that Oscar rant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it ever comes out, you know which podcast to tune into to find those. But
yeah, I mean, with that one, I personally have never seen a like the remake of Akira, and they redo it now. They redo the entire comic in a newer style, in this kind of Sword Art Online, cutesy anime style that would appeal to so many people, or like a Gundam Wing style. Like that has not happened. They might build on the story, they might make something new from it, and I think fine, if you want to try, that's okay. But the original IP is there. And just like you said, you can go back to those books, read the original story, and appreciate what was done there. So that's more or less what I mean. I don't mean it like Oscar is right. With Dragon Ball and with Naruto, there is this approach of, okay, let's go back and do it better. But
okay, I think I have a good counterexample, because Akira, I feel, aged very well. It's made in such a way that it will be readable for a very long time. But
okay.
A counterexample I just thought of, Osamu Tezuka, the god of manga, basically, absolutely, as everyone else in the world, I guess,
I know what you're
completely
say.
A glorious style. But his visual style did not age well. To the point where it's coming. Astro Boy used to love reading those, but they literally had Astro Boy remade. Well, I guess they changed the story a little bit, but I suppose that they knew the story was great, but visually it's dated to a point where I guess you can't sell it to modern audiences very easily. So they took what's his name, Naoka, 20th Century Boys, Monster. They had him do a version, and well he's known more for his stories than his very
Urasawa Naoki-san.
I mean, he has a beautiful style. It's not because we're comparing stuff to the backgrounds of Akira, just for context. But I mean, he's very readable to a modern audience. So they had him redo Astro Boy in a case of them going back and redoing what I suppose you could call one of the founding pillars of manga, being, well, anything Tezuka made, especially Astro Boy. So how do you feel about that? Because I feel like people not redoing Akira is kind of obvious, but something as Astro Boy, which is harder to read to, I guess if you're not really a comic fan, it's maybe not a book you pick up and read the old Astro Boys. So what do you feel about it? Have you ever read the remake?
I've never read the remake. I have seen the original Astro Boy mangas.
Have you read the Greatest Robot on Earth arc? Or it's very good, by the way.
Hey, guys, can you hold on for just one second? Let me.
Sure.
I gotta do a thing. So hold that conversation till I get back.
You know what? I'll take this time to go on a little sidetrack. I didn't want to go on because this podcast is going over time. You don't like Gundam Wing, man? I felt like you threw Gundam Wing under the bus there a few minutes ago, and I let it slide. But
I like Gundam Wing, but
are we
from
gonna have
Gundam Wing, from Gundam Wing, no. I like Gundam Wing, but from Gundam Wing, we then got Gundam Seed, Gundam Destiny, and all these other boys controlling giant manga like robots that are phantasmic and awesome, but they don't do anything with them.
Gundam
And
Seed is not good.
Yeah, that was the progression of it, and Gundam Wing kickstarted that. That's my only gripe with Gundam Wing. I watched the entire series. I watched the movies. I tried to get my hands on the actual Gundam Wing, like 1 to 100, 10,000th model scale with the wings and everything. I was a big fan.
I have one of those.
That's not what I meant.
I failed making it. It's somewhere in Belgium. I hope it's safe. I want to make it 1 point. That was my first Gundam, basically, and it's... I don't even know if it's good. All the nostalgia. I just love that show. I love that show to the point where I don't know if it's a good show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would just defend it on the grounds of loving it so much, and I haven't come back to it. But...
Do not misunderstand me. While I throw it under a bus for having that kind of style to it, and it's something that's very different from what anime was back then. Like when you compare Gundam Wing to how 0083 was, the Stardust War, which was an amazing combat series with a great story of how the Zeons actually like steal a Gundam, this thing that's like turn the tides of war for the Earth against the colonies.
Yeah, and right? I guess Gundam Wing was basically just a boys band piloting Gundams, and that.
Yeah.
And as well as that worked, Gundam Seed, yeah, that's oof.
Gundam. Oh, don't get me started with Gundam Seed.
They had to go fucking 3D with the robots. 3D robots is like my biggest turnoff, and it's part why it took me that long to even go back to the Evangelion remake movies, because I saw them the other day and they're pretty good actually, but 3D robots, man, is just never gonna do it for me.
Iron-Blooded Orphans does have good 3D animation mixed with the 2D animation.
Is that a name of the show? I never heard of that.
That's the latest Gundam next to Thunderbird. And they are both really good storytelling, amazing battle scenes. I like the progression of it. I will do like a Blu-ray like set of it one day, and I'm going to look into how the manga is to see how they illustrate it.
Oh, damn. Is that on Netflix? Where do you...
Iron Blood, I don't know where it is. The producing site used to run it online. So when they released a new episode, I could watch 5 episodes back from the main episode just online on their website. But Thunderbird, I think, is a movie for Gundam. And
I've even heard of these.
Really good.
Tune in next week for the exciting conclusion of this week's episode of Tokyo Comic Attack. You'll probably hear more about Mulele's comic process and whatever other tangent we were finishing there. As always, feel free to reach out to us. TokyoComicAttack@gmail.com. See you in the next one. You have been partially Tokyo Comic Attacked. The next part is coming up. See you guys then.